Hello, and welcome to, well, what would battleship and cruiser guns look like if modern technology was applied to them? And, well, for this video, it's an interesting one to discuss. It's an interesting one to discuss in normal, but for this scenario, it's kind of interesting to think about, because are we talking about modern technology as in if we were building a battleship and battleship and cruiser today, in which case we can sort of tell what guns would look like because we can pretty much scale up current guns, or if we applied it to previous generations, and what technology would we apply? Myself, I'm going to limit this to the barrel technology and the fire control technology in terms of making guns automatic and making our targeting as good as possible. And I'm going to see what we can do, but we can't. I don't have a simulator which I can show you all, which could allow me to attach things like laser guidance to the rounds. Let's be honest. If you're within radar range, if you're prepared to put a laser sight up high enough and give it enough power, you can probably introduce laser targeting and guidance fins to the shells. Having guidance fins that would actually survive a shell launch is potentially interesting, but there again, the amount of recently been looking at when I went to the Navy, the Defense Leaders Future Navy Conference, the amount of different shells I saw which have that system and have variations of that system, where they have some of them even were anti-submarine warfare shells, which were literally shells inside shells. Literally, you had the shell cover, and when that had a small charge to blow off, then you had this guided one, and sabot rounds, etc. There are systems you could design that would protect the fins. It might not be that a 16-inch gun would fire a 16-inch guided shell. It might be that a 16-inch gun would fire a 14-inch guided shell in a 16-inch package which splits off and then fins come out. That's still going to do damage. Let's be honest, that's still going to do damage, and if that's 100% guaranteed every time, every single shell in that salvo is going to hit that ship, you're not going to care much. You're going to go, yes, I have to use an inch of the outside to cover and protect it. But that don't bother me. It could even be that it is actually a full 16-inch shell, and it's only, let's say, the back third which splits off, revealing the guidance fins, or variations thereof. So there are lots of interesting ideas, but the trouble is, shameless book plug. If you want to know more about the start of the modern destroyer, a historian has to eat. A historian has to eat. So, this, by the way, is one of those mystical guns which were designed for the Sovietsky Soyuz, i.e. the Project 29. They're interesting. The Project 23, I mean. Yeah. That's what I call them, the Project 29. It's because the battle cruisers are the Project 69s. Those Russians, always ahead of their time, but leaving that to one side. There's a lot of testing and development which goes into guns. There is a lot of testing and development which goes into guns. And to put bluntly, what we're talking about, and we're going to talk about in this video, is we are going to be talking about the gun technology and the gun shaping. And I'm going to run through a simulation of what ships with modern, or as close as I can approximate using the software, to modern guns would how they perform against ships without the equivalent. Okay. So, without much further ado, I have to go hand wavium, hand wavium, hand wavium, and so let's see how we're going to set this up and what we're going to do. We're going to have the British Empire versus the German Reich because I feel like it. We'll go and see what I've got as base designs and see if we can't make them more accurate for what this would be. So, if I got as my base designs loaded up, oh, that'll do. That'll do for the Royal Navy one, because that was my playing around maximal King George V super. Well, actually, this is in the super line with 18-inch guns and 6-inch secondaries, all automatic, all gorgeous, beautiful. Fairly decent design, actually. I quite liked it. I quite like playing around with it. What have I got loaded up as a light cruiser? That'll do. They have a slight suicidal tendency. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. They do have a slight suicidal tendency. And if I can make the centre a bit more heavier, then that will help with their pitch and their roll. That is the thing I do find with UAD. If I make the centre a little bit heavier, it does help their pitch and roll. And it goes against a lot of my instincts. Halfway offset. 4 belt. That should just about do. Go back to this one. Anything I can... Oh, I have got a little bit. So let's up the centre belt a bit. Oh, half belt, so it's overweight. Ooh, it's quite close to the weight in it, yeah. What can we do anything to reduce weights? Half weight offset, 0.1%. I'm fairly sure they're all greater than that. But, yeah, we'll leave the pitch at 33.5% and hope it's okay. Anything I can do to reduce weight and focus it more in the centre of the ship? So full weight offset is 2. Undo that move. I quite like that. I'll leave it as this, and I'll hope it's okay. It's usually been okay, but this is going to be a classic long-range engagement. So let's see what we've got. Oh, we've got, as our battleship, we have our version of this. What I would always like to do is copy it. Ah, yes, now we do. We have it copied as deposit. So now I can do this. 15-inch guns are currently 15-inch 52s. Take them down to what they would do. Because, you see, conversely, what you'll probably be doing is building it as a 70. So if I go back to here at the moment, these are a 60, not a 70. So they are short by a 7th. So to make this equivalent to this would be normally 52, and that's roughly, and it's roughly what they're at. So I need to divide 52 by 7, which, by the way, the closest I can get is well, 49 is 7 sevens, right? 52 is 3 more than 49, and I'm just going to be lazy and go, that's right then, so that's 7.5 times 7. So I need to make this down to about 45 to get to roughly the right sort of level. Because one's a 7th smaller than it's supposed to be, so this should be down to... It works in my head, okay? Works in my head as making it roughly fair. And I would, if I was doing this as a full-on analysis, I would be doing a lot of mathematical equations and I'd be working it all out to a massive degree. But I'm not. So, and I'm just going to deal with the main guns. I'm not going to bother about the other guns, etc. Just the main guns. I am going to help its pitch out a bit and its roll by doing some work on the center belt. as much as I can using the weight freed up by the slightly shorter guns. Yay! That's probably gonna be a more accurate shooter, but it's gonna have a range of 25 kilometers versus this one's gonna have a range of 55 kilometers. 57 kilometers, yeah. That's about right. And again, these I would expect to be about 70s, and they're 66, so they are down 4 on 70, which I'm going to say is 1/14. Just burns, that makes life easier if it's 1/14. Okay, again, rough maths. So, what have I got as the light cruiser design for the for these guys? Bum, bum, bum. Yeah, what have I got? This is the light cruiser design, isn't it? And it's got 48s. And their guns were, let's see. Their gun was 15. Was it 60? Let's see. Oh, ooh, let's... Gun length overall, 9 meters, which, yeah, that is... 15 centimeters times 60. 15 times 6 is 90 times... yeah, that's 9 meters, so yes. So I would need to take it down by 1/14. Okay. Which is going to get it to what? 1/14. 42 equals 3, and then there's 8, hang on, 60. 56 equals 4. I'm going to just take it down by 4. Okay, that's what I'm gonna aim for. Well, apparently down to maximum there are 48, so that's just gonna have to do. That's just gonna have to do. Okay, let's launch and see what happens. And now, please note, there are fors and against us, because we're using this to give the guns about sort of length and targeting and the automatic firing, all these things are great. However, there are for and against wars, because the longer you make a gun, the the larger the charge you need to provide necessary gas to get the shell out of the gun at the barrel at the end at the desired velocity. The larger the charge, the more wear there's going to be on the barrel. The more wear there is on the barrel, the more often you're going to need to replace it. So there are fors and against us, and one of the reasons why we do have the larger caliber guns these days, they are 70s and things like that, is because honestly they're not used as often as they used to be. One of the interesting things is how the modern systems where we're adapting and we're using the guns for not just fire support of land missions in those occasions, but also for maybe for anti-submarine deploying shells, it's going to be interesting. Let's start this and put it on auto. You guys are not on screen. I have dealt with your cruisers on screen before. You're going to be on follow. You're follow, and you're on auto. And I'm going to lead this all. Lion, you're in charge. Look after the little girls. Okay. Flora, Chatham, I have no faith in you whatsoever when it comes to your ability to self-preserve. As a design, they are my most suicidal cruisers. Leaving that tool to one side. So, what is the interesting things you can do? Well, I can't simulate in this game the idea of having maybe laser rangefinders and laser systems to provide that sort of laser guidance. I cannot simulate the addition of what aircraft systems. I cannot simulate the difference of what fins and stabilization someone says, well, you couldn't put simulation elements on the shell. Well, if you're looking at some modern shell designs, there are lots of variations on the same old idea. Saber idea being things that plop off the shell in order to release the inner shell. Now, what you could have is you could have a shell round where some casing comes off the rear, let's say the back third of the shell that's actually in flight and fins deploy after it's fired through. You could have it so that the entire shell is encased, and let's say you're really firing a 14-inch shell with guidance out of a 16-inch shell firing, or in this case it could be a 16-inch shell being fired out of an 18-inch gun. Which are all sorts of interesting options you can go with. Now, it is an interesting perspective of the options, and you can fire very long range. As you can see, the shells are coming down. They are hitting the target, but they are down. They aren't hitting the amount of quick fire. An interesting strategy because that's going to refine things a bit more. For this cruiser, that's probably not a good idea to be the secondary range of the captain or the other cruisers, because they can just sit and pummel away, and they are doing with pretty good unit. Already got structural gameplay. Where was I? Oh yes. So, one of the advantages and disadvantages of this design is I've spent a lot of time trying to balance the ship out. As you can see, this is nice bit I need to get the central armour far thicker and reduce the fore and aft armour weight a bit more to just really efficient. But still, it's a fairly capable design, and it does quite a good job. And Sergeant Leopold is getting hurt. But saying that, with all the options you can do with modern shells, there is going to be a lot more utility. And I think the interesting thing is that it's more and more nations to think about the reality of what will we be dealing with if we are fighting sustained conflict. We find ourselves, what's the lesson of Ukraine? The lesson of Ukraine for me is that missiles are great and they're very, very useful, but you can in the end, shells are easier to produce, shells are easier to supply, shells are easier to resupply ships at sea. You can do shells, you can do a lot more work with than you can necessarily do with, oh yeah, it's got hit by you get hit by shells. They are now, which means oh, yeah. Apparently I also managed to make the German cruisers suicidal. I'm not quite sure why, but I did. Did they try and launch a torpedo? Don't avoid torpedo fire. Yeah, they're on the wall. Rather than it and flooding. Holy guacamole, why were you not on a void already earlier? Chatham. That's just bad. They don't allow me to put in wireless on the system to do another thing. That's not me, that's my thing. And frankly, the torpedoes are in using that, which if I would have thought I would have. But I'm not, and I'm about to lose my battle. But you don't have to keep involved in the fight. I prefer you to go out and prepare yourself. I really would. You are... How you're still afloat is amazing to me. How you're moving is just of inspiration. Just get out of it. Go away. No. The principal bolt is... Blue bolt, yes. 18-inch shells. At long range. Whilst torpedo tank did everything which hasn't been, nothing else has really got been, other than something that's got in torpedo range, managed to be torpedoed, hasn't been damaged on the British side because of the extended range. So, yes, this is what guns would look like. If we were building battleship guns with Robinson style techniques, believe me, I know some things that we didn't, because those were the things we could build against, but the thing is we have to continue to build those guns. So we haven't used the upgraded techniques to find the knowledge and understanding using those techniques to get those guns. If we were going to build 18-inch guns today, or anything like that, we would have to completely reinvent the technology and completely reinvent things. I mean, there is so much that's forgotten to be honest. Because while some probably consider, well, you know, we have the patents, we have the plans, we have the design, how to make mills, and how to make this. We don't have stuff that's good. We don't have stuff that is fast on. We don't have the years and years, decades of experience that people have with manning forges or manning the mills, involved to work on. We build all that, and it will generate and a huge amount of money. Because when you're building a gun that size, it is as much, if not more, of an art than a science. Oh, good lord, you keep allowing them to get into torpedo range. Yes, they die when doing it, but you keep allowing them to get into torpedo range. Avoid the torpedoes. Avoid the torpedoes. You should avoid the torpedoes. Oh. Goodness gracious me. Now, let's quickly, in the design ship stage, I want to go back to the cruiser design while I'm talking with you. And just work out, can we do anything? It's got maximum bulkheads. They're reinforced bulkheads. The anti-flood cable is free, but there is no torpedo belt available. below like heavy cruisers. Even has sonar. It has everything I can give it. I wonder if I could. Can I make it a triple? It's overweight. But you know, perhaps I can take down some of the halfway offset. Take that down to 3. That down to 3.9. And it's still 100 tons overweight. So yes, leave that as that. Put that to 2. No, it's down to 60 tons overweight, and put that down to 5. Oh, I'm 2 tons overweight, you. Oh, come on, that's got to be worth something. There's no point having a 0.1. I'm now 1 ton overweight. 1 ton. I'm 1 ton overweight. 1 ton. There we go. Okay. It's now got triple hold bottom on bottom, so yeah, but we'll hope that'll work in future. We'll hope that'll work. But anyway, back to XSplit and the normal slides. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I wanted to finish this by discussing what would change. Well, first of all, what would need to change for us to have modern guns like that? Well, if some power had kept building ships with large guns, even if they'd added missiles on, etc. Let's say this is a Stalingrad-class battlecruiser. Let's say the Soviets had built these, and they then built another generation, and even the modern Kirovs had had all those missiles, but also had big guns on them as well. Then, I'm sorry, you can sit there and I'm sure a lot of people will go, well, militarily they don't make sense, we could sink them with the missiles, the big guns don't matter. No, you're correct about all that, but the imagery is that it would require that the politicians would all be... Okay, I'm going to put this on first. Basically, the gun length and size would be a national substitution for another measuring contest, which, I'm sorry to say, but it does seem to me quite a lot of the political class does get into. I mean, it happens. So, whilst thinking with the logical, normal brain of it, suddenly we go, well, do we really need guns that big for modern warfare at this precise time and all these sort of things? You would be quite right to make a case of, it's not necessary, we don't need... The reality is, if that size has a big, massive gun, which is super long and very fat, you know what your side is going to do as well. We all do, okay? So, basically, the entire history of the world would change very greatly if Stalin had survived and somehow this idea of having these big gunships had stayed a part of the Soviet Union philosophy up until the present day. And then kept in Russian, but also it would probably then become part of Chinese naval policy, etc. And therefore, you would probably have, if you were announcing, as currently is carrying on in several debates, we are getting rid of cruisers, but they have ships which are called cruisers. Is this not a dereliction of duty? Insert thing here, and you can quite sensibly argue yes, but also you can sensibly argue that the US Navy hasn't had cruisers since they got rid of nuclear-powered ships. Not in the true sense of the word. They've had destroyer leaders, which were a form of cruiser, originally when they were conceived, but by the time you get to the TECOs, and I've argued this many times before, so I'm not bothered about arguing again, are to an extent not. They are not they are not cruisers. They are destroyer leaders. And you can call them cruisers for the important classification of who's going to be in charge of them, etc., and all those things, and their role within a group, yes. But they are destroyer leaders. They are... And they're not even... It's going to sound strange, but a cruiser, it's one of its one of its really important roles is being able to do the independent cruising as a global presence ship, as something which can turn up as a substitute for its group. And I've always felt the Arleigh Burke was actually slightly better in that role than the TECO. And the Arleigh Burke is unashamedly a destroyer. Please, no one ever thinks. The Arleigh Burke doesn't pretend to be anything it isn't. It is shamelessly a general purpose destroyer. And I have a lot of love and respect for that design because of that. I think that design is old. I do think in the nicest way that the US Navy has managed to fudge and muck up its three proposed successors. The Arleigh Burke is kind of like the modern swordfish, in that there are successors which come along and they do have benefits and negatives and benefits. The Albacore had a lot of benefits, but it never caught on in the imagination and even in the Navy as the swordfish did, because of the teething issues it had had when it was newer. And that meant by the time the Albacore reached its stride, there were a lot better aircraft available in service. Which is why the Albacore gets the reputation it does, and why, if we look at the Zumwalts, well, they would have certainly been improved if big gun technology had kept pace, because then, who knows, railguns might have been something that's been around for a long time. I would say there are problems with barrel wear, etc., with railgun technology. But it's one of the interesting things is it's mostly problems with barrel wear is it's going to sound strange. It's compared when they're comparing barrel wear to things that we don't normally use nowadays. Because if you're keeping up ships of this size with guns of this size, and you've been thinking about barrel wear, and you probably railgun might not work in sort of the 8 and 6 inch categories. But if you're talking about the 12 and 15 inch category, maybe 16 inch category, you might well have found that the railgun competes quite well with the barrel wear of firing the extra long barrel length that we would be currently operating. It would be interesting to have seen. It would be an interesting technological avenue to have gone down. I think it could have had a lot of interesting repercussions technologically for the development of our understanding and knowledge of things. I also think it would have been advantageous from the point of view of resupply at sea and replenishment at sea. Because the big problem we're currently working on is how do we reload VLS at sea? And is it even possible with modern missiles? Because they are quite so delicate. Which sounds funny for saying about something which is literally fired out of a VLS tube on a rocket, blasts up the aircraft at several times the speed of sound, and blows up. But there is a difference between doing that and going through the rough, tumble, bash, smash, crash of transfer at sea and then reloading into VLS at sea and doing all that. There is a difference. So, thank you very much for watching. And there does seem to be a theme developing in these videos while I'm away in Australia. So I'm going to add for this one a little question for you. I'd love to hear what you think different navies would have today if such vessels had kept going. You know, would some navies be known as the big gun navies because they didn't have aircraft carriers, they just had the big gun ships? Because you can say, well, you know, the big gun is a defective carrier and all these things. Yeah, but the big gun is probably cheaper and logistically more simple to operate than an aircraft carrier. So there are some navies which would go for, we are a total capability navy, i.e. France, Britain, as well as America, possibly Italy as well, quite possibly Italy. In sort of Western nations which would want to have the whole mix. I wouldn't be surprised if Brazil did, but Japan, probably similar issues as having aircraft carriers, but they might be allowed the gun. They might have been, people might have been happier for them to have the big guns than the aircraft carriers. Conversely, so whilst they're now getting aircraft carrying destroyers, through deck destroyers, they might have actually been allowed big gun ships for longer. Of course, Russia would have wanted to go full service, and I highly doubt China would be anything less than the full service it's pushing now in terms of the full spectrum capabilities. But we've also got countries like Turkey, Greece, for whom maybe such a ship would have been more of a practical and more viable solution to their problems. A missile farm with big guns and lots of radar, lots of sensors and communications gear, than an aircraft carrier. I would love to hear what you think about these things and what you think people would have. Thank you very much for watching, and take care. And thank you, Greg Wake, for the proposal, this particular topic. It's a cool one. Why does that keep shrinking?